Good morning, everyone. My name is Maya Luria with TMC for Seniors, and I am thrilled to have Jill Jones and Michelle Clark with me here today. They are going to be discussing From Soil to Gut, the bacterial bridge supporting health and well-being. You guys always do a phenomenal job of really breaking down different topics for us. So we love when you guys come. So thank you for being here today. How are you?
Well, everything's going well.
Good. So Jill, I know you usually like to start. You both have a presentation that you'll be providing us. I'm going to go ahead and put your PowerPoint up. You do have an online audience that's watching from home today. So if you have a question for Jill and Michelle, please put those questions into the chat and I will ask them afterwards. So I'll go ahead and put your PowerPoint up for you so that you can get started.
Okay. Thanks, Maya. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming today. This presentation is going to be a little bit different, I think, than I've done in the past 4 years or so. This is more of a story, and it's a story about bacteria, our invisible ancestors. We evolved from bacteria, and all life on Earth evolved from bacteria. They are important. They are the key to our health and well-being. And so I'm going to show you a little film, it's only a minute long, but it'll introduce you, it'll kind of give a roadmap as to where we're going, because my other presentations have always been about the gut microbiome or mitochondria in our cells, but there are also bacteria all around us. They're in the soil, they're in the air, they're in plants. And so I'll play the little introductory film. And if you can't hear it, like raise your hand and I'll turn it up.
Healthy plants need healthy soil for healthy growth. Below our feet lie a variety of living organisms hard at work converting complex organic compounds into simpler, more usable forms that plants can absorb for their growth. These beneficial soil microbes are often called probiotics. You've heard of using probiotics for human health. Like humans, plants have a microbiome too, and a flourishing population of beneficial probiotics in the soil can help plants absorb nutrients, improve their ability to repel diseases, help them recover from a disease or a pest infestation, as well as being able to regulate water uptake, and otherwise just improve the overall physiology. You can put all the nutrients in the ground that you want to, but unless they are broken down by these living microscopic organisms, they're simply not available for plant roots to absorb. Your soil is alive. Don't treat it like dirt or a simple anchor to hold the plant in place. Build a living soil that's biodiverse and teeming with microbes.
I don't like dirt. Well, like I said, we evolved from bacteria. Life began with bacteria, and we are living embedded in a bacterial world right now. If you weighed all the bacteria on Earth compared to weighing them to all the humans on Earth, bacteria would outweigh us 1,000 to 1. They're invisible. We can't see them. And I was telling Michelle, just think if we could see them. Pretty frightening. But so what percent do you think are harmful? Most of us only hear about them when we have an infection or something. But in reality, less than 1% are harmful. The majority of all these bacteria out there and other microscopic organisms, less than 1% are harmful. Almost all of them are beneficial or at least neutral. So this is kind of the roadmap. This is the format that I'll go through today. As I said, I'm going to weave together a story starting back billions of years ago when life was first on Earth. And so I'll explain how the first life on Earth was invisible. It was just single-celled organisms. But two cells got together and combined, and then that gave birth to all the rest of life on Earth, all the visible life. But for 1 billion years or so, life was invisible. So then fast forward today, I've done a number of talks about the bacteria in our gut and the bacteria in our cells that give us energy. When we still depend on them for our immune system, for digestion, even for our brain health. So that would be kind of a review, because I know a lot of you have heard about our gut microbiome and have been to my classes. Then I'll talk about the soil, and that will be the main part of the presentation, because bacteria gave rise to plants as well. So the chloroplasts inside a plant, those little chloroplasts inside plant cells that give them the green color, they came from bacteria. And I'll show you how that works. And I'll talk a little bit about the photosynthesis. And then how are these things all interconnected? There are tons of them in the soil, and healthy soil, the healthy microbes in the soil make healthy plants. We eat the plants, they're in our food supply. How are all the bacteria are like this invisible thread that weaves everything together and supports our health. And then the last topic will be about the new agricultural practices that are restoring the bacteria to our soil. Because over the years, we've lost a lot of our topsoil. With all the chemical sprays and all the different industrial agricultural practices, that has destroyed 1/3 of our topsoil so far. We've already lost 1/3 of the soil that can grow plants. And it was the World Health Organization, one of those global organizations has predicted that in 60 years, if we don't change, in 60 years, we would lose all of our soil. We wouldn't be able to grow plants anymore. But the good news is that we are changing, and all these new practices are being taught in universities now. And so I'll talk about something called regenerative agriculture, bringing the life back to the soil. So back a few billion years, well, 4.5 billion years ago, that's when Earth was formed, but it was too hot for anything to live on it. But then it was about 3.8, 3.5 billion years ago, that's when life first appeared, and it was all bacteria. They were all single-cell organisms, and there was no oxygen in the atmosphere. So the atmosphere was mostly carbon dioxide and nitrogen, and then other gases like methane and so forth. But to the organisms that lived on the Earth back then, oxygen would be devastating. It would kill them. So it was a toxin. And then what happened, as time went on, about another billion years, oxygen started appearing in the atmosphere. And when that happened, it changed the world. So now you had all these invisible living microscopic organisms that were living without oxygen. When oxygen started getting into the atmosphere, it was killing a lot. There were extinctions. There were whole species of these bacteria. And archaea, there's another type of organism called archaea. Those were the two. And they started dying off. But some bacteria were able to adapt. And they were able to adapt to the oxygen in the atmosphere. They were actually taking in oxygen and using it for energy. And so what happened was one of those oxygenated bacteria somehow was engulfed by a bigger cell, a bigger archaea cell. It got engulfed and it wasn't digested. And they started living together as in kind of a relationship. It was a free living bacteria that got inside one of these bigger cells. And what happened when it got in there, it was taking in oxygen. So this archaea cell, it couldn't use oxygen until the bacteria got in there. And so it became this friendly relationship. The bacteria was using oxygen to make energy for this cell. And we didn't learn this in school because this really wasn't discovered until late 1960s. And the lady who discovered it was a female scientist. She happened to be Carl Sagan's wife. She was an evolutionary biologist. And people didn't buy into that theory until about 20 years later. And so that was around the 1990s or so is when people really believed this, because they could look inside and see the genes and know that this was formerly a bacteria. But anyway, so the bacteria got in there, and as these bacteria multiplied, they reproduced by dividing, and they kept multiplying. And when that happened, they were making more and more energy. And the cell was able to get bigger and be more complex. And so this relationship developed where these bacteria were willing to give up some of their genes. And a large number of their genes transferred over to the host cell. And then that was like an evolutionary leap, because complex cells evolved. These were still individual single cell microscopic organisms, but the evolutionary leap was that a nucleus was formed. So this nucleus with a membrane around it was there to protect the DNA, and it protected it from being damaged. And then other little organelles developed inside the cell, and then it started dividing, and as these cells were dividing, they were able to communicate, just like the cells in our body now. Our brain cells, our liver cells, our kidney cells, they're all able to communicate. And that all started out with this event where the big cell ate the little cell. That's called the endosymbiotic theory. Endosymbiotic theory, because they established this friendly relationship and they couldn't live on their own now. That bacteria had given up its genes, so now it's living in the cell. But because of that, that made all of life, all the plants, animals, Earth as we know it, that made it possible. Before that, everything was invisible. And so if you look at the tree of life, this is how biologists describe the relationship between different species. In this case, it's different kingdoms. So the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom. This is it's called the 3 domains of life. And they settled on domains because a lot of people couldn't agree on which were the kingdoms. So they all agreed on the 3. And so, for instance, this whole side, that's invisible. They're still evolving today, and they're all around us, but they're invisible. They're the single cell organisms. And then all of life started out when that event happened, the endosymbiotic event. And down here, LUCA stands for Last Universal Common Ancestor. So a bacteria species, is the ancestor of all of us. And that's not even disputed today, because they can trace back the different genes. And they can look at all those mutations in the genes, generation to generation, trace it all the way back to a certain bacteria. And so over time, like 500 million years, from that time the bacteria entered the cell until later on, 500 million years later, when they stayed in the cell and were producing energy, they became mitochondria. And again, we didn't really know what these they didn't even have a name, mitochondria, until the beginning of like the 1900s. But they weren't understood until 1960s, 1970s. We didn't really understand what these were doing inside of our cells. But they're like every single cell in our body, all the different types of cells, every cell in our body except one, except red blood cells. Every cell in our body has these mitochondria, and they are the ones that produce energy for our bodies. All life, all complex life has these mitochondria, and it's like a battery. They need to be charged, and the way they get charged is they take in oxygen and the food we eat. So oxygen and the food we eat charge our batteries inside of our cells. And so they keep our body running. Every system, like I said, every system in our body needs energy. And so if we feel low on energy some days, maybe they're not quite working as well. Maybe it's something we're eating. But nutrition is important to keep these batteries running. Plants have, I said all living things, all visible life has mitochondria. But plants only use about 30% of them for their energy. Plants are a little bit different. They get their energy from chloroplasts, most of it from chloroplasts. And these little green, these chloroplasts were once bacteria. So a similar event happened. Once we had the cell that had the mitochondria, one of those cells absorbed a photosynthesis type of bacteria. And it was actually a green bacteria that got absorbed by another cell, and it created chloroplasts. And then the chloroplasts now are giving energy to plants and helping them grow. And the thing about the chloroplast, instead of getting their energy from oxygen, they get their energy from the sun and from carbon dioxide. And so I'll just do a quick review of how all this happened. I have to check on time. So we started out with these individual single cells. One absorbed a bacteria that became mitochondria and produced all the animals and all the different visible complex life. And then later on, one of these cells engulfed a photosynthetic type of bacteria. So there were really two events. The big one was down here with the endosymbiotic event, but there was another one that followed where they ate photosynthetic, and then that gave rise then to all the plant cells. They were able to get the energy they needed. So I'll just walk through, here's the cell structure the way it is today. We have mitochondria for our energy. Plants have both mitochondria and the chloroplasts for their energy. And then fungi, they just have mitochondria because they're in the dark. They're mostly underground, actually. And that's kind of the energy cycle. Life is all about energy. How we get our energy is what makes life. And carbon drives everything. And I'll show you that through this. This is an example of photosynthesis. So you see the plant growing here. That could be a tree or whatever kind of plant. But the plant is using the chloroplasts inside the cells, inside of its cells, to take in light energy and carbon dioxide from the environment and water, and then it transforms that into oxygen and glucose. We know these as carbs, but I put little sugar cubes here to try to show you that it's actually making food for the plants, and it's making food for the bacteria in the soil. So what happens is these carbohydrates, they're being created through photosynthesis. Most of it goes to help the plants grow and thrive, but then about 40% of it goes into the soil. So you're taking one kind of carbon over here and creating a different carbon compound over here that becomes food for the plant, food for the bacteria in the soil, and food for animals and people. So that's the whole photosynthesis process. And I'll just do one more here. Let's say it's a strawberry plant. Same thing, energy, carbon dioxide, water go into the plant cells for photosynthesis and make oxygen and glucose. And then we come along and eat the strawberries, and the strawberries are the fuel for those little batteries inside of our cells. So that's the cycle of energy, and carbon's driving everything because there's carbon in glucose, carbon in the soil, all of it. So now that was what's happening inside of our cells with bacteria and plant cells and animal cells. We also have free living bacteria in our body, and that's our gut microbiome and other places. We have bacteria on our skin, in our mouth, all over. But so I'll do a quick review of that because I've done a number of presentations on the gut microbiome. And it's the same thing that's true for animals. Animals, like cows, for instance, have a microbiome too. In our case, most of our bacteria live in our colon. In animals, it's different depending on the animal. In cows, most of them live in their stomach, and they break down all the grasses and the food the cows eat. So they help with digestion, and they do similar things that our gut microbiome does. And that's the formal definition, the textbook definition of what a microbiome is. It's a community of bacteria living together. So again, a review of what benefit is it to have all these bacteria inside of us? Well, it's not so much who they are, what the different species are. What's important is what they do for us. And what they do for us is make all kinds of chemicals. They make, you've probably heard, serotonin is made in our gut, or all brain chemicals are made in our gut. Serotonin, dopamine, GABA, all of these different brain chemicals. They also make certain vitamins. Bacteria make vitamin K, for instance. They make B vitamins. They make different hormones. They make our appetite hormones. So the more variety we have of different species of bacteria have different functions. They make different chemicals. So we want to have a big variety, and that's where we use the term diversity all the time. People who have more diversity of bacteria inside their gut are healthier. The more different species you have, it's like having a medicine chest full of chemicals that help you. It's like your own internal natural pharmacy. The more chemicals you have, the more health you have, the more antioxidants, the more anti-inflammatory chemicals. And that's really what short-chain fatty acids do. A lot of them are protect the gut lining, they dial down inflammation, and they're antibacterial. Some of the things that affect the composition of our gut microbiome are where we live, for instance. The big one is what we eat. What we eat mostly determines what type of bacteria are in our gut. Antibiotics kill off the good bacteria as well as any bad bacteria. And so we don't want to take them for a long time. Usually, of course, the bacteria might only be 7 days or something. But because what happens once that 7 days is up, the bacteria, the good ones, will start to grow back again. So the idea is not to overuse antibiotics. And then if I live in Tucson versus living in New York versus living in Europe somewhere, there's all different bacteria in those different locations. So that'll affect the composition of the bacteria in my gut. And of course, exposure to nature. There's a lot of bacteria in the soil and in nature in general. So in summary, this is kind of what they do for us and for animals, is we need them for digestion. We don't have the genes. We don't have the genes to break down fibers, for instance. It's the bacteria that provide that for us. They also work hand in hand with our immune system. Bacteria actually train our immune system. So they're really important to our health. They make the vitamins. And as I said, they affect our brain health and our cognitive ability. And for animals, they even affect their behavior. So what do we do to have healthy bacteria inside of us? And again, this is probably a review for a lot of people. It's important to eat a wide variety of plants, because all these different plants have different types of chemicals in them. And all the different plants feed different types of bacteria. There are some bacteria that'll only eat strawberries, some bacteria that'll only eat cauliflower or something. They kind of specialize. And so the more variety of plants we get that we eat, and that includes nuts and seeds and whole wheat, grains, any kind of plants, will be feeding our bacteria. And also they like fiber. It's also recommended that we eat probiotic foods rather than taking a probiotic pill. It's better to get them through natural foods like probiotic foods, fermented foods. And then ultra-processed foods are really bad for bacteria. They don't recognize ultra-processed food as food. It's more factory food. It's more made in a factory. And the way you can recognize if a food is ultra-processed is if you look at the list of ingredients. If it's something you wouldn't have in your pantry, it's probably ultra-processed. Or if you can't make it at home, if you wouldn't use that ingredient at home, if it has to be made in a factory, like a lot of the cereals we get now in supermarkets and a lot of packaged foods, you can't make a Doritos at home. It's made in a factory. And then, of course, limit the use of antibiotics. So now we're going to move into the soil and to plants. In 1 teaspoon of soil, there's about 1 billion individual bacteria and up to maybe 2,000 different species of bacteria. There's a lot in our soil. And like I said, it's almost like an invisible thread that weaves everything together. Because when the soil has a lot of healthy bacteria in it, it's making healthy plants. It's growing healthy plants, and that's what we're eating. We're eating more nutritious, healthy plants. So let's take a closer look at the soil. Most of the bacteria in the soil cluster around the plant roots. So there's like this tight zone around plant roots where bacteria congregate, and you probably know why. The plant roots are feeding them. That's where they're getting that glucose from photosynthesis. So the roots are feeding the bacteria, and the type of bacteria that's there will depend on the type of plant it is. Every plant will have a different species of bacteria around it. And what they do, the reason it clumps up like that is because these bacteria, and there are some other microbes in there, just not quite as many as the bacteria. But what they do is they secrete a substance that's like a glue. It's like a clear glue, and it holds them together. It gives them a little home. It holds them tight against the root. And so what it's doing now is it'll help the plants absorb nutrients, because there are a lot of minerals in the soil, but the plants can't take in those nutrients. They're not water soluble. They can't be absorbed in. So these microbes, the bacteria around the plant, they'll break down the nutrients and allow for them to be absorbed. The microbes also increase the production of these chemicals that plants make. Have you heard of phytochemicals? Phyto means plant. And phytochemicals, we used to call them antioxidants. They have a new name now because they do more than just antioxidants. But these phytochemicals are like the plant's immune system. They protect it from the weather, bad weather. They protect it from insects or any kind of infections. A plant can't get up and go away if the weather gets bad. So it makes certain chemicals to protect it and be more resilient. It also, all these chemicals also suppress diseases. They fight off infections, and they improve the soil structure because this glue around those root systems, it prevents the ground from erosion. So it holds in water better, like a sponge. It'll hold in water and moisture for the plant, and it'll keep it from evaporating. And so if there's a dry spell, it'll hold in more moisture. That's the idea for healthy soil. The other thing it does, I mentioned carbon. They call soil a big carbon sink because through the process of photosynthesis, these plants are drawing carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it in the soil. They're feeding the bacteria in the soil, and bacteria also eat a lot of organic material, dead plants and things that are decomposing, and they're storing it in the soil. So just like for people, we want to have a diverse, a wide variety of plants, or wide variety of bacteria in our gut. Plants and soil needs to have a wide variety of bacteria because they all do different functions. And many of them, and the more bacteria they have, the more healthy bacteria they'll have and be able to fight off any viruses or any kind of infections. So a healthy plant, like I said, will have the soil very close to it and create this barrier in the soil to hold on to any moisture. But what happens in a lot of the farming practices today, when they're spraying all these chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, and even fertilizers, will damage the bacteria, damage the soil, kill off the bacteria. And over time, it can cause soil erosion. And that's what has happened already to 1/3 of our topsoil. But also one of the farming practices is to mix up different plants and plant them all together instead of doing only corn for a whole crop. Mix corn and soybeans or whatever you're growing, mix them together, because when you do that, different plants will attract different types of bacteria. And then all these minerals are already in the soil, but the plants don't have access to them, so the bacteria have to break them down. So the plant can absorb them just like they break down fiber for us, and we can absorb the nutrients from the fiber. Nitrogen, now today's atmosphere is about 20% oxygen, but over 70% of it, I think 78%, I think, is nitrogen. So nitrogen's out there in the atmosphere, but again, the plants can't use it until it's broken down. And so there are microbes that do that. So a variety of plants attracting a variety of bacteria will create more chemicals, more of those healthy phytochemicals that protect plants. And so you'll hear this big, it's kind of the buzzword all over now in all of the internet videos and what farmers are talking about in agriculture and schools and all that, is nutrient density. When they start replacing the bacteria in the soil that's been lost, they find that the plants and the produce that we buy in the supermarket will be more nutrient dense, because over time they've lost nutrient density. Like carrots have lost almost 50% of the vitamin A they used to have 60 years ago. And other plants have lost vitamin C. They've lost minerals like calcium. But when they do the right processes, the right agricultural processes, they can start replacing the nutrients in the plants. And so for us, they act as antioxidants and anti-inflammatories. The other thing plants do is they talk to each other. And they talk to each other, they have chemical signals that go back and forth. And so what's happening is they will share different resources. When you plant them kind of close together, this plant will have one type of bacteria, that'll have another, and they can exchange those resources depending on what they need to be healthy. And sometimes they'll send a signal to the other plant that you're getting too close to me, and it'll stop it from growing the roots closer and closer to that plant. It's amazing what they've discovered recently in how plants, so they can actually talk root to root, they can exchange messages, or more often the case is the bacteria will relay messages back and forth between the plants. And so I was thinking about this, I started looking up houseplants, and I thought, gee, we don't even know what they're up to. We'll be getting cameras to watch our houseplants. Now, here's another example of how the microbes in the soil.
2024 game.
All right. Oh, okay. They're talking to us. So let's say an example where they have a beetle there that's eating the leaves of this particular plant. And microbes in the soil can help stimulate this plant to make chemicals that'll send out like an SOS signal. So I'll send out this signal to bring in predators of those beetles. So the wasps will come in, eat the beetles that are damaging the plant, and then when the plant's okay again, now we can get the healthy pollinators to come in. So, and that's all done because of these bacteria are helping them, these chemicals in the plants. Now here's another way plants communicate, and this happens to be fungi. Now most of us, when we think of fungi, we think of mushrooms. And so that's the visible form, but most of that plant is underground, it's invisible. And what happens is these fungi, what they'll do is they form little hair-like structures and attach themselves to the roots of plants. So over long distances, these long fungi root structures can reach over to other plants, and it's almost like an underground internet. They can start communicating that way. And I've kind of noticed that, and you may, if you have trees in your yard, I have 2 olive trees that are about 30 feet apart, and I noticed mushrooms coming up just around the trees. And I was thinking they probably have this conversation going in the ground where these fungi attach themselves to the roots and they extend the roots. So by extending the roots, they can dig deeper into the soil and get minerals and have access to water. So it protects them in a drought situation. And then trees also are photosynthesis, are pulling carbon out of the air and putting it in the ground to feed all of this life in the ground. And that's why they say, don't cut down all the trees. The other thing diversity does, I mentioned this before, all the root structure holds the soil together and prevents erosion. So what is a healthy plant? Well, I've kind of said it's nutrient dense. And the way they test for that nowadays, they can they go into the plants sap. Just like we have blood running through our system, plants have this sap. And it can be tested and they can tell what percent of vitamins and minerals are in there and what kinds of phytochemicals are in there. And they resist pests naturally. They don't need chemical pesticides and stuff. Healthy soil will help them resist pests, and they tolerate it. Now, what grows healthy plants is regenerative farming practices. I'll walk through each one first, and then I'll show you the summary at the end. But regenerative means they want to bring back all the life in the soil. There are certain practices that will help them get the bacteria growing again and get more plants growing and make a healthier soil. The first practice, and these can be applied, these are really principles of farming. It's not a specific process per se. These are principles and guidelines for farmers to follow to make healthy soil. And a big one is minimize soil disruption. What they mean by that is when plows or tilling machines go through the soil and they go back and forth, tearing up the soil, they're also tearing up all these root structures. They're destroying the homes of the bacteria in there, and they're allowing for erosion. The other thing, any chemicals that are, any synthetic chemicals that are sprayed on all these plants, it's killing off a lot of the microbes in the soil. Even fertilizers, even synthetic fertilizers, it might work for a while, but over time, you'll start to lose those microbes that break down nitrogen for the plant naturally. So those are the two big practices. No tilling, they call it no-till. And like I said, a lot of the farmers, especially the smaller farmers and the mid-sized farmers, are adopting these practices. Another one is to keep the soil covered. So keep plants and root systems in the soil in order to keep the soil alive. Keep feeding those bacteria. Because what happens if they have a whole season where they're not growing anything and the soil is bare, carbon dioxide starts to go from the soil up into the atmosphere, and also moisture. It starts to lose water and it dries up and becomes desert-like. And there's even a term for it. They call it desertification, which is a new term. A third practice is to grow, and I mentioned this, a diverse range of crops. So mix the different crops together, and there are ways to harvest it. They have equipment now that if you have, like, for instance, if you have carrots and onions and potatoes or whatever, you have all these different plants together in the soil, there is equipment that can come by and harvest it, even though it's all mixed together. But the idea is diversity brings more diversity as far as the soil microbes. And this last principle talks about livestock and what they want to do for the soil and for healthy plants and healthy grasses and keep the soil covered. They want to mimic the way the wild bison and the buffalo and the elk, when they used to roam the different land, the way they handled their grass, the grasses they were eating. They would go through the soil, go through the grasslands, and only spend a short amount of time there, maybe only a day or a half a day or something. But they wouldn't eat the grass all the way down to the soil. They'd only eat it down so far and then move on. And so what happened is that those grasslands, they were never uncovered. They would start to grow back again. And that's how the wild animals used to move through the territory. They were really protecting the soil, and then the life of the soil was still there. The biology wasn't destroyed. And so now farmers, they have techniques where for the farmers who are doing grazing, have their cows graze on grass bed, they move them through at a certain pace. And so this is, I think a picture's worth 1,000 words. So one thing to help me remember and help everybody remember the difference between the two, if we continue with the industrial farming practices, and a lot of people call it chemical farming, and keep destroying the topsoil and all the ground, that's where we'll end up. It'll be desert. So, but if we do the regenerative practices, if farmers do that, those different they follow those principles that I was showing you, avoid the tilling. Now that particular machine can go through and plant seeds right into the soil and not even have to dig up anything that was there. It can just drill a hole, plant seeds right in the soil, and it doesn't disturb the plants that are already there. So you can see the difference. Regenerative farming, conventional farming. And they call this regenerative agriculture when they're incorporating animals. Because what the other thing the animals do, the cows or whatever's moving through their goats, it's the manure will fertilize the soil. It's kind of a natural fertilizer. So here are the 5 principles, and you have this in your handout. So you might be asking, well, what's the difference between that and organic farming? Well, the regenerative is more an extension of organic farming. Now, organic farming is specific processes that farmers have to use in order to be certified as organic farmers. It's like a checklist. This is how you grow your food, or this is how you treat your livestock. And then you get a certification. And the goal of organic is really to avoid synthetic products in the food, to avoid the fertilizers and the pesticides and all of that. So if you buy organic vegetables, for instance, it will be non-GMO, and it won't have any antibiotics, it won't have any harmful chemicals in it. Regenerative farming goes beyond that. They say they want to restore the soil. It's practices that, like I said, no tilling, keep the ground covered and that kind of thing, to restore the life of the soil. So now, what does that mean to us when we're going to the grocery store and picking out fruits and vegetables and different produce? Has anybody heard of the clean 15 and the dirty dozen?
No.
Okay, what that means is let's presume these are from conventional farmers. If they're farmed in the conventional way with chemicals, there's a particular set of fruits and vegetables that will absorb the chemicals, that will absorb the pesticides and the fungicides and everything. And even after they're cleaned and peeled, when they're tested, they found that these particular ones absorb a lot of chemicals. And so if we can, we should buy these organic because they won't have the pesticide. You have the actual list in your handout. Over here, the clean 15, they're safe to buy if they're not organic. They don't have to be organic because they make those phytochemicals that ward off all the pests in the environment, and they don't need to be sprayed. They make their own defense chemicals, and so they can grow and be healthy without anybody spraying them, so they will not have all the chemicals in them. So those are the ones that you can buy. And I was surprised at mushrooms. I thought mushrooms, but if they're not spraying them, then I could see how they wouldn't absorb the chemicals. But this was done, last list came from 2024. There's a nonprofit group that does this. they go in and test all these fruits and vegetables. And then how do you recognize nutrient-dense produce? How do you recognize nutrient-dense produce? There are different ways. The chemical plants that have a lot of nutrients in them are making a lot of phytochemicals, and they will have a deeper, richer color to them because these phytochemicals give them the color. And even the smell, a cucumber should smell like a cucumber. Watermelon will smell like watermelon because these phytochemicals give them their smell. Also, you can kind of tell by weight. If you pick up 2 lemons, for instance, they both look the same size, but one weighs more than the other, that is likely to have more nutrients. And where do you get them? Well, the best thing to do is look at where they come from. And if they had to travel a long distance, they wouldn't be as fresh, and they may not have the nutrients in them. Not because they lost nutrients along the way so much, it's just because farmers are using a lot of hybrid type seeds nowadays. So to give plants a longer shelf life. And that's a whole other story. Hybrid seeds don't harm us, it's not like GMO, but they may not have the nutrient level. It creates a different variety. And then, of course, farmers market. Now, heirloom is another way to recognize plants that are likely to have more nutrients. And I didn't realize what heirloom meant is it's the variety, let's say a tomato, the variety of tomato that's been passed down from generation to generation. It's the same seeds, the same variety. So it hasn't changed. It's not a hybrid. So it has all those nutrients that it had in the beginning. And it's typically 50 generations. So they're really a special type of plant. And then, of course, organic or regenerative are more likely to have nutrients in them.
That's incredible.
Before I do that, I just want to say this is a little film that's going to kind of summarize everything I just said.
It's an incredible team. There's bacteria, fungi, archaea, and even viruses. Think of them as the network architects, engineers, and recyclers of our ecosystems. Together they form what's known as the soil microbiome, a complex living network that lives below the soil that helps recycle nutrients, trap carbon, and helps your plants grow. But their real superpower is cooperation. Take bacteria, for example. These guys form symbiotic relationships with plants through something called the rhizosphere. This is a thin layer of soil surrounding plant roots where microbes and plants trade services like an underground marketplace, with plenty of discreet handshakes. Plants provide sugars to bacteria through their roots, and in return, bacteria break down the organic matter into essential nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, which plants need to grow. Without soil microbes, our plants would struggle to survive, and therefore, so would we. Plant roots are very rarely in direct physical contact with all of the nutrients and resources that they need to grow. So they rely on bacteria to bring those resources to them. Some bacteria, like rhizobia, are nitrogen fixers. They take nitrogen from the air and turn it into a form plants can use. That might sound simple, but nitrogen is vital for plant growth. It's the main ingredient in proteins and DNA. Without microbes doing this job, the world's food supply would be in serious trouble. But wait, there's a second superpower at play here. To understand, we need to talk about another microbe, fungi. Fungi also play a key role, especially the famous microcausal fungi. These fungi act like an extension of plant roots, forming a vast underground network called the Wood Wide Web. This fungal network connects plants, allowing them to trade nutrients and chemical signals, which leads to one of the most interesting phenomena in all of nature. Plants talk to each other. So, when a plant is under attack by pests, It can send out distress signals through the fungi, like a wartime messenger or lighting the beacons of Gondor. This warns other nearby plants to defend themselves. It's like a natural plant internet. Still think soil microbes are just dirt? They're
That echo, could you understand it? Okay. All right, getting close to the last slide. This is the core message of the whole presentation. There are tons of bacteria out there. I learned a new word, nonillion. This is what scientists estimate the actual number of bacteria on Earth. It's a million times a trillion times a trillion, 10 to the 30th power. And they're hard at work for us. And if we feed them and take care of them, they'll take care of us and our planet. And that's the core message. And then today happens to be Earth Day. So happy Earth Day. There are 2 films that are airing on Amazon Prime Video, if you get that. One is called Kiss the Ground and the other one is called Common Ground. 2 excellent documentaries. Thank you.
Yeah, top 30 questions.
So thank you so much, Jill. And I was going to mention that it was Earth Day as well. So this talk was very apropos to have. One of the questions that came in was, how does composting help the soil?
Oh, composting is great for the soil because composting is organic carbon. So it feeds the bacteria and it'll start bringing bacteria into the soil. And it's good for your houseplants too.
Great, good. And, thank you for sharing about the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. It's an easy way, I think, because I feel like you don't always know whether you need to purchase organic or not. So it was nice to be able to have a list to sort of show you, like, these are the ones you really need to focus on, when it comes to your health. And so I think that was such an easy way and an easy breakdown of, what those are. So are there, I had another question came in, are there favorite places to shop for good vegetables and fruits?
Well, there are farmers markets all around Tucson. That's one place. And I know they're only usually once a week. But I think, I don't know if there's a favorite place, but Sprouts has a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. And it's really a place that has them labeled well. So you can go in and, like, Sprouts now set up their display where they have organic in one section and non-organic in another section. Trader Joe's has a lot of organic stuff. Any Whole Foods, there's just a lot.
And I do love being able to support our farmers, our local farmers. So, heading up one of our farmers markets is always a great choice as well. I want to thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to wrap it up with our online audience, and I will turn it over to you for any questions in person. Thanks for being here, Jill.
Okay.
Thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to having you back. Our next talk is going to be on Thursday, April 24th. It is Legal Documents You Should Have, a comprehensive overview. That talk is taking place at 3 p.m. Thursday, April 24th. Then our next talk, or we'll be wrapping up the month, is Prices May Vary, Funeral Options. That is on Wednesday, April 30th, next week at 10 a.m. With the Funeral Consumers Alliance. So if you're interested in either one of those presentations, please feel free to give us a call. We'd be happy to get you registered for those classes. The phone number is 520-324-1960. Thanks again for being with us, and we hope to see you back.